Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Florida City and County Management Association webinar entitled Building Safety, Understanding the Broward and Miami-Dade County Building Safety Inspection Program. My name is Bob Lee, and I have the honor of serving as your host today. Joining me as co-host is Dr. Dina Hurst and Mr. Mike Ryko. Dina and Mike will be the individuals who will be assisting our attendees most with any technology issues or questions they may have. Sponsors for today's program include Government Services Group, Granicus, and Strategic Government Resources as our corporate sponsors. We also have routinely the sponsorship of the Florida League of Cities, the Florida Institute of Government, and the Center for Florida Local Government Excellence. We appreciate collectively their support to enable FCCMA to provide these webinars at no cost to attendees. For those who have not participated in a FCCMA webinar before, we want to be sure to refer you to the control panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen. More specifically, I'd like to refer you to the chat box, which is the lower part of the panel. Therein, you can provide questions or submit questions for today's presenters. We always do our very best to get responses to all of those questions. I also want to reference just above that, two slots above it, the materials section. You may want to check that because we do have some information that you'd also be able to download as part of today's program. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. First is John Travers. John is the building official of the Building Services Division for the City of Fort Lauderdale. Next is Jamie Gaskin, Director of Board and Code Administration Division of Miami-Dade County Department of Regulatory and Economic Resources. And Edward Rojas, Assistant Director and a building official for Miami-Dade County. Gentlemen, welcome. And if you wouldn't mind, before you actually begin your presentations, if each of you, we can start with you, John, in the order that's listed, just summarize your backgrounds briefly for today's attendees.
Thank you, Bob. Just making sure audio is working good.
It is.
All right, thanks. I'm John Travers, and upon completing my tour in the United States Air Force, I went through a training program in the electrical apprenticeship, served in the electrical industry for several years, including becoming a contractor. Crossed over to the regulatory side in 1985, served in several Miami-Dade County municipalities, briefly served in 2011 in Monroe County, the Florida Keys, as building official. And since 2014, I have been the building official for the city of Fort Lauderdale.
Thank you, John. Edward?
Good afternoon, and thank you, FCCMA, for this invitation to speak with you. Yeah, my name is Edward Rojas. I'm building official for Miami-Dade County. I've been the building official here since March of last year. Prior to coming to Miami-Dade County and joining the team here, I spent 15 years in the city of Doral, where I was a building official, and for the last 5 years of my career, I was a city manager for the city of Doral. My educational background is in architecture. I have a construction degree. I was a degree in construction management. I'm a contractor prior to joining the public sector. Professional for about 30 years in the public sector. I actually worked with John and started in the city of Hialeah with him, so I have a little bit of history with John. And like I said, I joined the team here a year ago, where I had the pleasure and the benefit of working with Jamie as well very closely. We work together, hand in hand pretty much daily. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to presenting to the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Edward. Jamie?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having us here today. My name, Jamie Gaskin. I've been with Miami-Dade County going on a little over 27 years now. started with the county in the at the time right after Hurricane Andrew with the product control division, revamping the Florida building code and involved in drafting of a lot of the testing protocols that have ultimately made their way into the Florida building code at this point. There I worked as a product control inspector, certification of laboratories, and performing quality control and quality assurance inspections of all the products that were issued product approval. After that, I eventually became the supervisor of the division, and then transferred over to building official of unincorporated Dade until such time that Edward stepped in. And have now been working as the director of the board and code administration, which oversees all of the building departments in the geographical Miami-Dade County, involved in the certification of all the code officials through the Board of Rules and Appeals, as well as overseeing the contractor licensing through the construction industry licensing boards.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Jamie, for that overview as well. Just a real quick shout out to the FCCMA Professional Development Committee. They absolutely have identified the right people to put this on today. So we're very fortunate to have you. And with those introductory comments, I'd like to just turn the PowerPoint over to you, and you can begin the program for our attendees today.
Thank you, Bob. I'd like to start off with a little bit of history, beginning with the requirements that were established in Miami-Dade County for what has become to be known as the 40-50 year recertification program. And all of this started back in 1974 with tragedies. And as we know, tragedies are always what offset or what kickstart change. Unfortunately, but back in 74, there was a collapse of a building that was leased by the Drug Enforcement Agency in Miami. And the collapse essentially wound up killing 7 people and injuring 16 others. Next slide, please. This incident spurred meetings of the Board of Rules and Appeals and development, and through consultations with the President Miami Chapter's Florida Engineering Society, recommendations were made to perform inspections and recertify buildings at intervals of about 25 years. Ultimately, later on in May of 1975, the Board of County Commissions adopted and passed an ordinance amending the South Florida Building Code then to require that buildings, except single-family residence and duplexes or minor structures of 2,000 square feet or less, be exempt, and all others be recertified at intervals of 40 years. How that all became from 25 to 40, you guys know the politics of some of the negotiations, but ultimately it was established at 40 years and required 10 years thereafter intervals to be recertified as well. Next slide, please. So the responsibility of this recertification essentially falls on the building owner. The owner is responsible for contracting and finding or establishing contract with a professional, an architect or an engineer, as required in the procedures, to perform the inspection of the building and issue a report of conformity that would be submitted to the jurisdiction. There's a set procedure of guidelines and templates that are provided to the professional community so that they could follow and address or identify all of the points that they have to hit on these inspections. And then should the inspection reveal that repairs are necessary to the building, the owner is essentially given 150 days from the date of these notifications to effect and perform any repairs. Now, we see this as a checkup. This is not intended to be the time for, as I call it, surgery. This is a routine checkup that is prompted at this interval of time when the building matures to this age to make sure that it's still healthy, it's still sound to continue, recertify, and we'll see you in 10 years. Next slide, please. So moving forward from 1975, along the time, as we all know, all the codes were revamped and everything was being reconsidered and making sure that every code provision was accurate. In 1992, right after Hurricane Andrew, there were provisions and added to these requirements to add the electrical recertification, to include the electrical inspections as part of this recertification requirements. So after 92, both the structural and electrical in Miami-Dade County were required. Next slide, please. Then in the year 2000 through 2002, the Florida Building Code is developed and implemented, and that eliminated the requirement altogether. It did not make it into the Florida Building Code, neither as a statewide requirement nor as a high velocity hurricane zone requirement to have these 40-year recertifications performed. So Miami-Dade County still was able to keep this by including it into the local Miami-Dade County Code chapters, specifically in Chapter 8-11, where existing building section F includes all of the provisions for the recertification of the buildings and components. Next slide, please. Which leads us to the body that has the oversight of all of the code officials responsible for enforcing, for deploying, and making sure that these provisions are complied with by the owners. The Board of Rules and Appeals is the official legal body here in Miami-Dade County that certifies the code officials. These would be from the building official down to plans examiners and inspectors, and holds these officials accountable for enforcing and complying with all of the provisions of Chapter 8. The board essentially is charged with providing interpretations to the building code, any disputes that would arise from an owner, a contractor with a building official. This would be the board to hear such appeals. They would suspend or revoke contractors' rights to pull permits. This would be, again, the board that these matters would be settled at. Suspend or revoke permits, investigate enforcement of the code, and certifying, as I mentioned, the building officials, inspectors, and plans examiners. So I guess next slide, and I'll hand it off to Ed Rojas so he can take it from here from the perspective of how a jurisdiction, and again, as any of the 35 municipalities, inclusive of the unincorporated Miami-Dade County, of how this program would be deployed throughout a building department. So, Eddie.
Okay. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you all again for giving me the opportunity. So here we'll talk a little bit about the inspection report procedures. The requirements of Section 8-11 in the Miami-Dade County Code of Ordinances covers the maintenance of buildings, and the regulation applies to all existing buildings. The expectation of this section is that basically that buildings shall be maintained in a safe condition, and that all devices and safeguards that are required by the code shall be maintained in good working order. Section 8-11F in our Code of Ordinances outlines the recertification regulation as is applied by the jurisdictions in Miami-Dade County. And the section that's in this slide at 8-11F41 basically gives BORA, the Board of Rules of Appeals that Jamie was speaking about, the authority to issue the minimum inspection procedural guidelines that are used to prepare the reports that are eventually submitted to the building officials. And these minimum inspection procedural guidelines are posted on the website, links that you see there. I recommend that anybody who's looking to initiate one of these programs, the language in these things are pretty clear. The intent is spelled out pretty clear. The forms that we use, identify all the components of this inspection, and they're very, very clear. Just as a footnote, Section 8-11 also covers annual recertification of boilers and pressure vessels, which is something that is required by the state, and the recertification of structural glazing as required by the Florida Building Code. Next slide, please. So here are the 40-year and 40 and 50-year recertification overview. Currently all structures that are reached the year 40 years of age need to be recertified, and every 10 years after that. The essential purpose of the inspection and the report is to confirm in a reasonable fashion that the building is safe to occupy. And the inspections that are conducted serve, to determine mainly two important things: is basically the structural, the condition of the building in terms of structure, and the general condition of the electrical systems. And this is a visual examination, and in most cases it is considered adequate. The inspection should be conducted throughout all habitable and uninhabitable areas of the building as are available and accessible, and enough of the structure needs to be looked at so that a reasonable conclusions can be drawn by the design professional doing the inspections. This inspection process really heavily relies on the experience of the design professional that's been contracted to do these inspections, and the information that is provided by the sports. As it stands now, there really is no requirement.
We're getting a little bit of static. A little bit of static. I don't know if it's if you would maybe lean more into or lean away from your computer and see which works. We'll give you the thumbs up here.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I'll go back. The inspection, relies on the design professional and the integrity of the information provided. Right now, there's no inspection process, but that's something, or follow-up to these reports, but that's something that could change in the future. The scope of the structural inspection is to, verify foundations, roof systems, masonry bearing walls, steel framing systems, floor systems, concrete framing systems, windows, and in the event of wood framing, any trusses and wood framing systems. So that's the scope of the structural inspection. And something to note is that, structures usually, they'll typically show you a sign if they're under duress. So things to look for when you're doing these inspections are imperfections and cracks and any distortions or any water intrusion or anything like that. That'll give you indications that the structure has issues and that they need to be considered. Electrical inspections look at branch circuits. They look at grounding of equipment. They look at conduit raceways. Make sure that the wiring is in good shape. They look at anything that could potentially cause any kind of short. Emergency lighting is looked at. Exit signs, alarm systems. Everything's got to be in good working order. And again, the purpose of the electrical inspection is to confirm with a reasonable fashion that the building is safe for occupancy. There are some things that are important to note about the guidelines and that are important to this process. Is that typically the inspections don't verify the original design of the building unless, of course, there's a need to or is determined by the engineer to do so. Testing procedures and quantitative analysis is generally not required. Again, unless the engineer decides that he needs to dig in deeper into some of these matters that he sees. And in manual procedures such as scraping and chipping and maybe tapping on areas where the concrete seems to bulge for any hollow spots, those are things that are recommended. you know, when they think that the visual inspection doesn't deem to give enough sufficient information. As mentioned earlier, there are exceptions, you know, single family residence, duplex, and minor structures, 2,000 square feet or less, and with an occupant load of 10 or less as defined by the Florida Building Code. The report itself, it has a structural form, it has the electrical form, and statements that are made by the engineer as to the building, whether it's safe, whether it's unsafe, whether it's safe with qualifications, or in the event of repairs, the building has been made safe. You know, as part of this process, like Jenny had mentioned, in the early 90s, the requirements for parking lot illumination and guardrail requirements are enforced as part. 8C3 covers illumination on parking lots, typically for mixed uses. The minimum requirement is 1 foot candle from dusk to dawn. 8C6 covers guardrails and parking lots adjacent to abutting bodies of water. This applies to new construction as well as existing parking lots. And something to note about this, when this ordinance was implemented, it was any properties that did not have these features had 18 months to comply. The process itself, if the building structure and electrical is deemed to be safe, the building can be recertified. So we can bifurcate the requirements of the other two requirements. And then those could be handled separately, and we do that typically, and we just issue a failure to maintain, what we call a failure to maintain, and cases are opened up to code enforcement until those portions of the process are complied with. Next slide, please. So we'll go through here a notification and a non-responsive cases. So this whole thing begins every year with the property appraiser. They give us all the information for buildings that have been deemed that year as they have to recertify. Our IT section filters this information and creates a list. That list, our account clerks and our finance section creates the cases and the files for this, and the notifications go out and are mailed to the property owner, the first notification. The property owner has 90 days from the day of the notification to submit the reports. If in the event that the owner is non-responsive, another notification is sent. It's a first notification of violation for failure to recertify. Customer or the property owner is given 30 more days to comply. If the property remains still unresponsive and no indication that they're going to that they have a report, a second notice is sent.
Feedback. And Edward, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It just got a little bit of feedback again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll lean in. So the second notice is sent out, and an additional 45 days is given to the property owner to comply. If after 165 days they haven't complied, the cases are referred to unsafe structures. And at that point, a final notice is sent from the building department that informs the property owner that they've been referred to unsafe, and that unsafe structures will be handling their case from that point on. Next slide, please. So here's another scenario where we have responsive cases and a path to recertification. So in this scenario, the property submits the report on time. The reports are reviewed by structural and electrical divisions, and if they're approved, well, then the building is recertified, and a letter is sent notifying them of recertification and reminding them that they have 10 more years before they have to recertify. If repairs are required, then the report is disapproved. A notice is sent that repairs are required, and the owner at that point has, the remainder of 150 days from the day of notice to pull permits if needed and effectuate whatever repairs are required. If after the 150 days the report hasn't come back, a second notice is sent, giving the owner 30 more days. And if at that point the property is non-responsive, then we go back to what we talked about in the previous slide, which is a first notice of violation, 30 days, second notice of violation, 45 more days, and then finally it would be referred to the Unsafe Structures Board. So these procedures are all meant to give the property owner fair notice and due process. Our procedures are, they try to be as fair as possible. I think that, there's plenty of time built into these things. And so we try to work with property owners as best we can. Next slide, please. So the cases now, if they go to unsafe structures, just a little background on unsafe structures. Section 8-5 of our Code of Ordinances talks about unsafe structures. The Unsafe Structures Board has jurisdiction over both incorporated and unincorporated areas of Miami-Dade County with respect to its powers and its duties. All actions at this point, once a case has been referred to unsafe structures, need to go through the Unsafe Structures Unit until it's brought into compliance. The unit, when the case is referred, they go through a verification process where they review all the information that is transferred over from the building department for accuracy, and they verify that the property wasn't exempt for any reason or had been demolished. And so they look at it, they do a verification process, and then the actions that are taken once all that's been determined is they placard the building, they post an NOV, a notice of violation on the building. Holds are placed on the property in our system so that any documentation or any permits or applications that come in would have to be reviewed first by the Unsafe Structures Unit to make sure that everything has been addressed. And a title search is performed to identify all the interested parties of the property. And then finally, a notice of violation is mailed to all parties, and the notice of violation is recorded. If the owner, fails to comply with all the time frames and all the requirements of that notice of violation, then the county will schedule the case to be heard by the Unsafe Structures Board. Our Unsafe Structures hearing and appeals process flows through two paths: the Unsafe Structures Board and the Unsafe Structures Appeals Panels. The appeals panel is comprised of 3 hearing officers. And they hear basically single-family residential type cases. The Unsafe Structures Board is comprised of 13 hearing officers, and they hear basically everything else, which is all the commercial properties and multifamilies and all of that. Right now, we managed to get 60% of our cases get certified on time. 20 of those, 20% of our cases, go through the Unsafe Structures process and get certified through Unsafe Structures, and then about 20% remain Unsafe Structures cases, open cases that carry over until compliance is achieved. So it's a lengthy process, and it's we try to always work with these property owners, and we try to get these numbers a little bit better, but right now, again, it's a process that depends on the property owner's willingness to fall into place. Next slide, please. So this here are some proposed code revisions. Obviously, in the wake of all that what happened, there's been a lot of conversation going on about proposed revisions to this process. And I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege to just recognize my colleague, Jamie Gascon, who's gotten thrown into a hornet's nest trying to gather all this information, meeting with all these different boards, having to do presentations in front of our commissioners. He's been wrangling cats out there to make this happen. And so some of the common threads that we've been hearing, are things like early notification, which would mandate that notification, 1 or 2 years in advance of the 90-day notice. The objective here is to try to notify, give property owners a little bit more time and notify them a little earlier. Something else I'm sure everybody's heard is to shorten the recertification mandate timeline from 40 to 30 years. It's also been discussed to mandate exclusive use of structural engineers and electrical engineers for threshold buildings. Right now, our process is a bit more broad, allowing architects and engineers alike to certify. This requirement would be to try to up the qualifications of the people certifying these more significant, higher risk buildings. Another thing has been talking about extensions, and tying extensions to some kind of an assertion made by an engineer certifying that the building may be occupied while it's going through this recertification process. And for those projects that have ongoing work to come into compliance, every 6 months to give some kind of an assertion every 6 months while they're doing work. Right now in Miami-Dade County, we did begin requesting letters from engineers to consider extensions. So we've already kind of started that already. Another thing that's been discussed is to legislate a mandate, the duty to report, make it obligated that any adverse findings on the structure, whether outside of this process or within this process, to be made aware, all the building officials of the various jurisdictions. And then the procedural recommendation that's come in is, the structures that have multiple unit ownership is to have the associations and the HOAs notify their residents that their building is being declared unsafe, or that it's going through this process to come into compliance. Next slide, please. So there are some limitations to this process, and something that's very important, and Jimmy and I have gone blue to the face saying this in all the different locations where we've been speaking, is that maintenance is very important. Just because you meet your certification milestones doesn't mean that ongoing maintenance is not the best way to keep these properties in good shape.
Must be the speakers or something. You get a sweet spot.
Yeah. Okay. So maintenance is very important. These buildings, it shouldn't be that they're getting a complete facelift after 40 years. I think it should be something that it should be ongoing. And when buildings get recertified, there could still be hidden issues. So there's no guarantees that the recertification is gonna cover everything. And there was where it goes back to the integrity of the design professional and the information that's being provided to us. And something else is just general kind of advice that I think any of those jurisdictions out there that already have this program in place, things like courtesy notices can be done now. You don't have to wait till the regulation changes. And the building officials have authority given to them through the building code to request additional information, to take authoritative actions like demanding that areas of the building be vacated or be shored up, or in an extreme case, vacate the building and cut the power. It's something that it's always been in those codes. As a code official, maybe before I got here, I did a handful of those, something like that. And now, since this whole thing, it's become, it seems like every other week I'm cutting the power somewhere off because of something that's gone wrong. So it's really, this process has really accelerated in the wake of this tragedy in Surfside. And I think the last, I don't know if my slide with the basic workflow diagram made it in this presentation. Yes, it did. Okay, great. So here, just to kind of end off my presentation, I have a very, very basic workflow. It starts with the recertification notices that go out. It drops down to the inspection reports. If you go over to the right, you'll see the review process. If the review process is approved, then the building is recertified. If at the review process it's identified that there's work that needs to be done, the report's rejected, the repairs and the permits are required to be pulled, and a new report's supposed to be submitted, and then it goes through the review process again, and then on to recertification. If at any point the property owners become non-responsive, then obviously, you know, they're going to go on to the unsafe structures process, and compliance is achieved through that process. That's pretty much it for me. I'll turn the wheel over to Mr. Travers, and I look forward to answering any questions at the end of the. Thank you again.
Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. Making sure everybody can hear me okay. Bob? Jamie, can you hear me all right? All right, good to go.
Thanks, John.
Thanks. Sure. Once again, I'm John Travers, building official for the city of Fort Lauderdale, and I'm going to talk briefly about the way that the program is administered in Broward County. As you heard Eddie and Jamie talk about earlier, there's about 35 municipalities in Miami-Dade County. Broward County has about 31 municipalities. So if you go slide, please. We actually mandate the building safety inspection program in a section of our Chapter 1 of the Florida Building Code. So we're a little bit different than Miami-Dade County. Their requirements come from their county ordinance in Section 8. We've actually incorporated it into our amended Chapter 1 of the Florida Building Code. And that requirement states that when a CO anniversary of 40 years is achieved, then the owners of the building or the management company of the building have to hire a third-party inspection consultant, whether it be an architect or an engineer, to perform what we call a building safety inspection report. And then each 10 years subsequent to that anniversary, that 40th anniversary, a new report is required. Slide. So as I said, it's built right into our Florida Building Code Chapter 1. This is the section 110.15. We've chosen to call our program the Building Safety Inspection Program. We didn't feel comfortable with the use of the word recertification in that granting a building a certificate of occupancy basically allows safe occupancy of the building, and this report isn't meant to provide a regulatory re-occupancy or recertification of occupancy to the building. As long as the building's safely occupied and used, it maintains its occupancy level throughout its life. Both the Miami-Dade program and our program look at the structural integrity and the electrical systems in the building. And those are the only two elements that are looked at this time. Some people may feel that plumbing and mechanical or air conditioning, HVAC, as part of it. In our program in Broward County, we just followed the original setup of the program, and that is structural integrity and the electrical systems. And again, these are visual inspections generally that are performed by the third-party individuals looking for deficiencies and suggesting mitigation. Slide. So the dates for this notification come from the Broward County Property Appraiser's Office, similar to the way that Miami-Dade County administers their program with their property appraiser. The Broward County Property Appraiser issues a countywide list of all of the qualifying buildings to the Broward County Board of Rules and Appeals. The BORA staff then divides all of those buildings into their appropriate municipalities, and each June of each year, they distribute the list to all the municipalities of buildings that are approaching their 40th anniversary of CO, and of course the 10-year intervals after that. Slide. So this list contains all of the buildings that the Broward County Property Appraiser issues to each of the municipalities. It then becomes our job to eliminate buildings that are not required to participate in the program. And I'm listing those here. Federal buildings, state buildings, schools that are under the jurisdiction of the Broward County School Board, buildings that are constructed on Indian reservations, 1 and 2 family buildings, and then a little bit of a difference from Miami-Dade. They have a threshold of 2,000 square feet for their minor structures. Broward County chose 3,500 square feet or less for our threshold as being exempt from the program. Slide. So we then, as a municipality, notify the principal owner or the management company or the association that they have a requirement to hire a qualified architect or an engineer to perform this safety inspection. They have 90 days to present those results to us. And if mitigation is necessary for minor repairs, they have 180 days to do that. And there's the opportunity for the building official in our Chapter 1 of the Florida Building Code to grant additional time for some of those repairs. And if you think about it, if you've got a high rise that's got 150 or more units in it, and you're going to have to perform mitigation on the railings of all the balconies, that may not be something that's completely finished within the 180-day period. But as long as we've got the permits issued and the work ongoing, the building official has the discretion to grant additional time to complete all of those repairs. I do have to make everybody aware of the fact that sometimes this can be a real challenge for us to notify the current owner or the current condominium association manager, and that's because owners change hands a lot, and condominium associations change hands. Whole new boards may be elected from time to time. So this can become a little bit of a challenge for us to reach out to the proper people. And that, again, is part of our process as one of the municipalities in Broward County in notification. Slide. I need to make everybody aware that the safety inspection reports that are turned in are only reviewed by the building official or his designated representative. We don't approve or fail a report. We just use that report to then carry on further actions if necessary. We file those into our system and they are maintained by us. If corrections are necessary, then we actually assign a code enforcement case to it. And if those corrections are then begun with proper permits and everything, the code enforcement case is put on hold while the repairs are taking place. And as I mentioned earlier, the building official has the ability to grant an extension if the repairs are going to take longer than the 180 days after the report has been filed. Slide. So I'm going to use my city, the city of Fort Lauderdale, as an example. We receive about 300 to 350 addresses each June from the Board of Rules and Appeals. Then we have to eliminate all of those buildings that don't have to participate in the program, and that's the ones that I mentioned earlier, federal, state, Indian reservation buildings, schools that are under the jurisdiction of Broward County School Board, and 1 and 2 family dwellings, and then the structures that are 3,500 square feet or less. We eliminate all of those from the list that we receive, and then we set out on the task of notifying the building owners or the building management companies of their obligation to reach out to a third-party engineer or an architectural firm to perform the building safety inspection. Slide. This is a process that goes on all year long. Obviously, with the number of buildings that all the municipalities have to deal with, it isn't going to be a 30-day or a 60-day process for notification, nor is it going to be a 90 to 120-day process for any corrections that may go on. Sometimes these things take the entire year for us to get things moving. When we come across owners or management companies that are dragging their feet on this or not submitting those reports to us, Then we activate those code enforcement cases and we take them before a special magistrate. And if that little push doesn't get them moving, we can also take them to the Unsafe Structures Board, much the same as Miami-Dade County does with their cases. Slide. So the collapse of the Champlain Tower in Surfside has really brought all of the aspects of our building safety inspection program and the Miami-Dade County building recertification program into the spotlight. But I would like to remind everybody that's on the webinar today that Miami-Dade County and Broward County are the only two counties right now that even have a program such as this in place. Again, Miami-Dade instituted it in the mid-70s. We looked at their program in Broward County and we instituted it in 2006. And so it's been going on for quite a while in both of our counties. Slide. In addition to being the building official for the city of Fort Lauderdale, I also serve on the structural subcommittee for the Broward County Board of Rules and Appeals. I will let everybody here know that we've already had several meetings, and in fact, the mayor of Broward County has an ad hoc committee meeting that has been ongoing for about 3 sessions now and has another session coming up in September 17th, I think it is. Looking at the way the program is run, having people make suggestions about possible changes or improvements to the program. And I just need everybody to know that we want to make sure that we look at the changes that are being suggested very carefully, because if we do perform some knee-jerk reactions to the tragedy that has happened in Surfside, once you get something built into a code, it's very, very difficult to get that changed or moved out of the code at a later date. Slide. So as I mentioned, we in Fort Lauderdale, all of us in Broward County, have participated in the building safety inspection program since 2006. And we really are committed to public safety and efficient public service as part of the keystone of our performance. And I did want to mention a couple of things that I took notes while Jamie and Edward were giving their presentation. It was mentioned that tragedies such as the collapse in Surfside often bring about changes in our building code. There's actually 2 things that drive changes to our building code. Naturally, a disaster that goes through a thorough investigation to see if there are deficiencies in the code and the way that we look at things, that's going to bring about changes. And for that very matter, after Hurricane Andrew in '92, we had a lot of changes in our building codes to help fortify our buildings a little bit better down here in South Florida. But there's another factor that also drives change to our building codes, and that's new products, new methodology, new techniques. The building code is perpetually trying to keep pace with new developments in the construction industry, and so that's another cause for change. Further, I'd like to mention the fact that building aging and deterioration literally begin with the day that the building is occupied. And it's important that people who are managing or building owners pay attention to what their building is saying to them over the years. Jamie mentioned that the 40-year anniversary of CO is kind of a mandated milestone to begin a process for both of our counties. But conscientious building managers and owners associations, they should on their own be observing how their building is aging and taking care of things as they become aware of them, rather than waiting until that 40-year threshold shows up on the horizon. If you're going to wait till that time to make some of the repairs, then those repairs are going to become costly, and they're also a little bit invasive to the occupants of the building. Another point that I wanted to make as far as the 40th anniversary and the 10-year requirements afterwards, once the 40-year anniversary comes and we are mandating this report to be done, The follow-up reports each 10 years is based on that CO anniversary, not on the date that a report is submitted. So if a condo association takes 2 to 3 years before they get a report to us through a code enforcement case, they're going to turn around and have to provide a follow-up report 7 years later. So the dates are based on the CO date, not necessarily the inspection report submittal date. Slide. So that's my presentation, and I look forward to questions. And at this time, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, Bob.
Thank you, John, Jamie, and Edward. Very informative in terms of your process and some of the challenges that you faced. I had some open-ended questions, but most importantly, we have a question here from one of our attendees, and I'd like to pose that to you, and any one of you can address it. And it follows up to what you were talking about, John, in terms of the number of jurisdictions that actually go through this process, or the limited number, I should say. The question is as follows: how many employees can a municipality expect to need to implement this process?
Well, I'm going to speak for a municipality, and that is City of Fort Lauderdale. I have a building code enforcement team that has 10 people who are administering and managing this program. Now, keep in mind that I've got a fairly large number of high-rise condominiums and a lot of buildings that participate in the program. I can certainly see where smaller municipalities that may be somewhat revenue challenged, they're not going to need a division or a department as large as mine. And that building code enforcement division that I spoke about, not only do they administer this building safety report program, but they also go through all the other programs, code enforcement as far as building without a permit or unlicensed contracting, cases before the Code Enforcement Board or cases before the Unsafe Structures Board. So I've got a fairly robust department that works on it, and I can tell you that we're busy all year long, and this takes up a good amount of time.
Jamie, any thoughts on that question? Most of the municipalities and the government agencies that are on this call are much smaller than you all, so I appreciate your acknowledgement of that, John.
Yeah, I would add that it is relative to the size of the jurisdiction and the age of the structures that are in those municipalities. A newer municipality, if this is still maintained at the 40 years, will be some time before that unit would have to be pried up with support, the support necessary for the review, processing, and collection of those reports.
Bob, if I can just touch on one quick point before Eddie speaks. Because we incorporated this building safety inspection program directly into Chapter 1 of the Florida Building Code, the Broward edition, that allows me to use building funds to fund this program, and I don't have to rely on the general fund to do it. So that might be a point that some of the smaller jurisdictions keep in mind. If it's actually a part of the building code, then we're not in violation of what the Attorney General for the state of Florida considers using funds outside of that to enforce the Florida Building Code.
Very good point, John. And in a number of cases, depending on the development, the amount of development, for example, or permitting, those building funds may be better positioned financially to cover this anyways. So very, very good point. Edward?
Yeah. So I think that the program is a function of obviously the amount of these that you get every year, the staff that you have, obviously, and then how much you can leverage technology to help automate this process somewhat. We do about 1,000 of these every year. And we have 8 to 10 people probably dedicated to this process between technical, clerical, and any of the staff that handles it in the unsafe structures area. So I guess my recommendation to anybody out there who's starting the program, and then just to make a comparison, when I was in Doral, you know, we had 2 people that basically managed the program, and, you know, not including the technical staff that would review the reports. In Doral, it was just really it was, again, like we do it here in Dade County. It's electrical reviewer and a structural reviewer to just look at these reports. So I think that, you know, it's going to be the resources that you allocate towards this, I think, are going to be a function of how much technology and how many of these reports you're going to get, and that'll tell you how many people you would need. I think for us here, we're going to be, you know, given all these things all these changes that may be coming, you know, we're going to formalize our process a little bit. We're going to automate it a little bit more. We're going to make it a little bit more transparent to the public. So we're investing in technology. We're going to have a little bit more dedicated staff, not necessarily increasing the numbers, but just creating a staff that is dedicated to this process, because our goals is to, again, because of the volume, is to try to bring these properties into compliance a little bit quicker, and not have so many of these cases lingering on the back end like tends to happen right now. So that's kind of my take on it.
Thanks, Edward. We've also have another question that's come in, and as they come in, we want to go ahead and address them right away. This has to do with the fees that are charged, and more specifically, how they're calculated. What are some of the variables or provisions, criteria that you employ in order to come up with a fee structure that's going to be valid and acceptable?
I could just jump on very quickly. In deriving something like this, you definitely need to calculate or figure the staff that's going to be allocated to do this. Secondly is the time. You want to be as simple as possible in trying to spread out a uniform fee for all to follow, and then those that get into trouble, you might have some additional fees if you have to go the unsafe structures route for administrative costs and what have you. But from a program perspective, you know, you want to get an average of how many of these reports you're going to have to be reviewing, the staff you're going to need to allocate to review those reports, and take averages of actual review time that staff would take, in addition to obviously the administrative. So in calculating that, it would be a fairly quick amount of hours for the technical and a number of hours for the administration piece of it.
And I'm going to add a little bit to that, Bob. What I did was I looked at how many reports am I receiving from my Broward County property appraiser, and how much staff is it going to take? And it's a fluid budget item every year. It's going to change as you fine tune your program, but initially you need to figure out, maybe have an outside consultant tell you how to set this thing up. That's done quite often when you're looking at new sub-objects in a budget. But you want to make sure that if you're going to be receiving 100 to 200 building reports, CO reports from your property appraiser, that you're going to be able to manage a staff that can handle that. And so the first year or two, it might be a give and take situation, but it'll smooth itself out once you see how the program is going to be acting year after year.
Edward, anything to add?
Well, no, I think, well, Jamie knows our process probably better than I do, because he ran the program here. I would just say, obviously, just echo what's been said. You know, you got to look at what your costs are, and you got to understand your program as you implement it. You know, we have a flat fee. I guess it's just shy of like $400. We're looking at, if we start to introduce an inspection component to this, which is one of the things that has been talked about, we're going to be looking at our costs of this program. Obviously, we don't want these costs to escalate to make this a burden. but we do have to cover our costs. So right now in the process of looking at and reevaluating what our fee schedule is for this process. But definitely you have to make sure that you at least cover your costs. So that would be the only thing I would add.
Well, gentlemen, we're at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, we could have a lot of discussion on this topic, but on behalf of FCCMA, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to prepare for today and to present for today and address these couple questions that did come in. Very insightful as well. Also like to, again, thank the Board of Directors for FCCMA for continuing to provide this type of training for their members. And I want to particularly mention, when I said the Professional Development Committee, also specifically what that committee does this year is they have members assigned to preparing individual webinars. And as I recall, Max Serta, the Hillsborough Beach Town Administrator, some of you may know him, and Chris Cooper, Director of Sustainability in Fort Lauderdale. Those were the two that were responsible for putting together this great panel. So we want to acknowledge them as well and thank them for doing so. With that, no other questions. Oh, as soon as I say adjourn, there will be a survey that's going to pop up. If you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds, those who are still on as attendees, and filling that out for FCCMA, would appreciate it. Other than that, thanks again, and for everyone, we're now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.